Grasslands are one of the top 3 declining ecosystems in the southeast. We think that it is because of a lack of prescribed fire that was originally performed by Native Americans. And so without that constant disturbance, forest becomes part of the succession of our land. We generally think of grasslands as dry upland prairie type situations, but really it can be anything from the driest of dry sites to even a bog can be considered a grassland because they're wide, open, sunny places, and even with, very frequent inundation, we'll still have a grassland.
I'm Walter Bland, and my little company, Rock Spring Restorations, we're a habitat restoration practitioner here in Georgia. We've been working for about 10 years. We started as a grower of native plants, mostly native grasses and native wildflowers. And we found that a lot of our customers needed assistance on removing native species and preparing areas for the installation of the native plants. And we've been doing that for about 10 years now. We're trying to restore habitat for wildlife. There are a lot of birds and pollinators that depend on early successional habitat, and their numbers are declining, and the species are all under stress because of the loss of habitat. And so this is our way to try and mitigate some of the damage that has been done in the past and still going on, and see if we can help wildlife by putting some of nature back like it was originally supposed to be. This site was a former location of part of the botanical garden, and so there are a lot of non-native and ornamental species in the area that we're getting rid of. We also have a couple of native species that are invasive and will overwhelm the site if we don't manage them. Things like wingstem, tall goldenrod, dog fennel. Those are all native species that are fine when they're way off in a 100-acre pasture, but in a actively managed area like this, we have to control the volume of them. So the goal of this particular project is to convert a non-native grassland habitat that is underneath this power line right-of-way to native warm season grasses and wildflowers, basically establishing a native Piedmont prairie here underneath the power line. We still have a long way to go. I would imagine we are approximately at 50%, and I'm hoping that by this time next year we'll be at 80 to 90%. Things are coming along well, and it looks like we're on track to do that. Although we can get to pretty close to 100% a self-sustaining habitat, because this area has been disturbed, and also because it's a lot harder to manage this area with fire, which is a key component of a self-sustaining habitat. We may not ever get to 100% here, but we can get pretty close to it. It'll always require a little bit of ongoing maintenance. Probably once every 3 years, we'll have to come back in and spray some of the undesirables back and rejuvenate certain areas, but we'll get there eventually.
Our goal for the future of this site is for it to be a replica of the high-quality prairie that we have north in the power line, in the area that was never planted with Bermuda. So it's almost all native, and it doesn't require much management other than occasional spot treatments for some aggressive natives and annual mowing. And so we'll never be able to stop managing this site. It will always require probably spot treatments of herbicide, mowing, and maybe even someday prescribed fire.
The stages of this project, there's three primary stages. The first stage is eradication of non-native species. The second stage is installation of native species, appropriate native species. And then the third stage is ongoing maintenance of the site, long-term maintenance. And those stages often overlap, and we have had to overlap the stages here in this project quite a bit, just due to the really extreme weather conditions that we've been dealing with over the last year and a half, 2 years. We are still working on eradicating the non-native species from the site, but we have already started installing native seed and native plugs into the stand, and we will work around those as we continue to get rid of the non-natives, and then hopefully next year be at a point where we can accelerate the installation of the native wildflowers. So the biggest challenge is that this is a former botanical garden, and all of the soil has been disturbed in this area, and there is a heavy seed bank of non-native and undesirable species. So about the time that we're able to clear, one stand of non-native species, another one will jump out of the ground. It's oftentimes easier to establish warm season meadow in old fields that have not been cultivated or the soil disturbed in any way. That tends to accelerate the growth of the undesirable species and the non-native species, and slow down the growth of the native species. Native species really are adapted to very harsh, undesirable soil and weather conditions. And so sometimes, I tell my customers, if you have really bad, dry, site conditions where nothing else seems to be growing, that's perfect for a native warm season meadow. So there are a lot of weedy species and non-native species that we are dealing with in this project, and they are common problems throughout the Piedmont in any grassland habitat. One of the primary species, if you look over here, is Bermuda grass. This is a common pasture and lawn grass. It's a very difficult species to eradicate because it has underground rhizomes, and it's very resistant to the treatment of herbicides. There are good tools that you can use against it, depending on what your site conditions are and what your other species around it. Another common problem that we have here is crabgrass, and crabgrass is a problem everywhere in the Piedmont. It's an annual species. It's not hard to kill or eradicate, but it does take persistence, and it does generally take some very specific chemicals to achieve, total eradication. So we use two primary means of planting our native species: seed and plugs. Seed is generally a more challenging process than plugs are for various different reasons. But you might want to choose seed if you have a large area that you're trying to cover and you have site conditions that are easy to manage. If you have a small area, or you have real uneven terrain or real variable site conditions, you may need to use plugs in order to feel like you're making progress on your project. So we earlier last year, in the spring last year, we broadcast broom sedge and little blue stem seed here on this site, and the seeding that we did last year did really, really well. This year we've been using primarily plugs and we've already put about 15,000 plugs in the ground. We'll probably have another 10,000 plugs that'll go in the ground here before the end of the year. The primary species that we're using on this project are broom sedge, which is Andropogon virginicus, and little blue stem, which is Schizoscurium scoparium. Those are really your workhorse species in the Piedmont, and the bulk of the plugs that we've put in this project are those two species. We've also put in a bunch of split-beard blue stem, which is another really beautiful Andropogon ternarius. And then we've put in purple top, which is Tridens flavus. And we're also in the shady areas, we're putting in Chasmanthium sessiliflorum, because it's a native species that will do well in pretty deep shade and will create the grassland underneath the trees. This particular part of the area of the project used to be covered completely with fescue, and we sprayed out the fescue and we planted little blue stem, which is this species right here, and purple top, which is this species right here. Both are in full flower right now. We also have a lot of beaked panic grass in this stand, and broom sedge in this stand as well.
So forbs are a fancy word for wildflowers within a grassy matrix. A lot of the solidagos, asters, I'm thinking of fall bloomers, and then in the spring we've got phlox, salvia, and good summer examples are Monarda fistulosa, Monarda punctata, and many, many mountain mints are found here.
All of our material comes from collections that we've made in the Georgia Piedmont. We're a licensed seed collector. We generally go to the U.S. Forest Service stands, the Oconee National Forest and the Chattahoochee National Forest. Some of the material comes from my farm, which is over in northwest Georgia. The broom sedge that we put out here is from northwest Georgia, but it's all coming from this area, and that's really important particularly for a project like this, that we try and preserve the local gene pool and not, go to the Midwest or go outside of the geographic area and pull in genes from other parts of the country and put them in here.
Well, we learned not to break the soil because that just kicks up a whole host of weeds that you never even knew existed. We learned that deer are a huge challenge in establishing our forbs, so we're thinking that it's important to get the grass matrix established first and then kind of hide the forbs within it. Deer really don't like to eat grass, and so you can kind of obscure your forbs in the thick grass once you've got your thick grass. And then we learned that it's not a one and done kind of project. You're going to have to come back year after year and reassess. And right now I think we're at about 50% native cover, which is not bad, not awesome, but I think these next 3 years we'll see a lot of progress in that.